Welcome to the Rural Blueprint. I'm Hannah. This is a podcast about the innovative spirit showing up in rural communities across the Pacific Northwest and beyond. The small business owners, community partners, and organizers who are strengthening their towns. Each episode, we go deep on their journeys, the strategies that are actually working, and what we can all learn from the people who've decided to invest in rural places. If you care about where those communities are headed, you're in the right place. Let's get to it. I'm very excited for this interview today. I've been waiting and been so excited to talk to anyone on the Startup Colorado team. So this is Vanessa McCrann, the managing director at Startup Colorado, where she previously served as director of community engagement. She spent years building entrepreneurial ecosystems across 53 rural counties in Colorado, organizing events, cultivating a give-first culture, and helping communities figure out what their version of a startup ecosystem should look like. Startup Colorado is a nonprofit that supports rural founders and ecosystem builders across the state. They believe that anyone should have the ability to start and scale a business in the place they call home. They help founders access the human, social, and financial capital that they need to build thriving businesses. So they have a variety of programs. They have something called the Idea Factory and Growth Challenge, accelerator programs. West Slope Startup Week is an in-person free 5-day event in Durango, which we're going to talk about in this interview. Durango is near Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah. So everybody in those areas who follows us, you should definitely listen to the rest of this interview. They also have other programs like the Rural Startup, which is an advice newsletter. So you've worked across 53 rural counties in Colorado. I was mentioning how different parts of Colorado are so vastly different. When you walk into a new rural community or getting to know them, what are you looking for, and how can you determine what kind of entrepreneurial culture could take root there when you're just getting introduced to a new place?
Absolutely. So, when I walk into a new rural community, I'm not looking for what's missing. I'm looking for what's already there. So, connectors exist everywhere, even informally. So, that could be a Facebook group, a farmer's market, a coffee shop with regulars. We often joke that a coffee shop in rural is one of the most common accelerators or incubators for a small business, because that's where we meet to work on our laptops and have conversations with people that can help us. And it just, usually has good Wi-Fi too. So it's a very two-sided investigation. And I'm there to listen because the 53 counties are so different. Like Grand Junction and Trinidad need very different things. My job is to listen and watch before I suggest anything. I'm looking for who's active in the business support side of things. So is there a local accelerator? Is there a co-working space or a maker's lab? Is there an economic development group that's actively participating? How active is their chamber of commerce? Is the SBDC easy to get a hold of? And then on the other side, I'm looking at, what are the local success stories of business that people are proud of? That's cultural proof that entrepreneurship is possible in that community. And another thing I look at is what's the community's relationship with risk and failure, because some places celebrate scrappiness and others kind of shame it, and that can shape everything. So I look for what the place already has that's distinctive, like agriculture, tourism, creative economy, natural resources, and build from there rather than trying to import some generic model.
That's an amazing answer. So there's a lot of focus in rural economic development and programs, funding, technical assistance. That's a lot of necessary work that goes into a lot of different organizations and nonprofits. But you focus on culture. I'm really interested to ask you about your perspective on that, especially with the communities that you've worked with. So why does culture matter just as much as all those other things that are necessary?
Yeah. Well, in our view of things, like, you can parachute in funding and still watch it sit unused if nobody believes they're the kind of person who starts a business. So programs are infrastructure and culture is the decision to use it. Both matter, but culture comes first. So in a community with strong entrepreneurial culture, founders talk to each other. They share suppliers and customers and investors, and they give first. Without that, programs are kind of just isolated transactions. So a town with a give first culture creates entrepreneurs even without formal programming. A town without it can have every resource and still see nothing grow if they don't have culture. So, what does it look like when culture exists? It's when you see local founders mentoring each other without being asked, someone hosting a pitch practice in their living room, the newspaper covering a startup the same way it covers a high school championship. And the absence of culture is when, founders or small business owners feel like they're doing something weird and no one to call when it gets hard. And there's like a culture of secrecy instead of collaboration. So for us, the culture always comes first because supporting the mental wellness of founders so that they feel like they can talk to each other and that they have space and the ability to connect is so important because you can find so much business advice online and you can go on ChatGPT and ask it, how do I run my business? But daily grind of being a founder and recommitting to a good idea day after day is so much easier when you know other people who are doing it too, and you feel like the community you're in really supports that.
That's beautifully put. Can you tell me, just in your perspective, what that looks like, what a gift culture looks like in a community and how you look for it and try to incentivize it?
Yeah, because in a rural community, there are fewer resources for everyone. And that is especially true for business owners. If you think about a small town, they don't have buses, taking you everywhere. They don't necessarily have a lot of ways to, if your truck breaks down and you need to get something from A to B, you're going to call your neighbor. It's a very tight knit community generally in rural communities. Everyone who's running a business is a problem solver. Everyone is wearing multiple hats and they want to support each other. A lot of times it is important to make sure that you've got examples in place and that founders are talking to each other and not feeling like if that other founder succeeds then they're not going to succeed. So much of that is about building the culture of the startup scene. And so yeah, when you're in a rural community, there is that I'm going to help my neighbor mentality, way more so than in an urban environment. In an urban environment, you can feel like a number instead of a person. Whereas if you're in a rural community, especially if you've been there for a while, you know exactly who your neighbors are. You know who to call on when you need help. You know that you can trust that person to give you honest advice when you say, I'm thinking about this new idea for my business. Do you think it's going to work? And they're going to tell you, well, I've actually tried that already. So here's what worked for me, or here's what didn't. And sometimes their missions, their customers can align and they can do things together, which works out really well.
Love that. That's such a good point. That always comes back to you. I feel like there's no way it couldn't. I wanted to talk about West Slope Startup Week, which is in October. If you're in the Four Corners area or in southwestern Colorado, you should definitely check it out. It's going to be in Durango this year, October 5th through the 9th. You're going to have 70 plus sessions, and I've taken a look at the different facets of things you're going to be doing. That event is also free, it's in person. How did you build something like that from scratch, and what does it become now? What is the event like when you go to it now?
So Westlove Startup Week started back in 2019 in Grand Junction, actually. And so it was there for the first 4 years. 2019 was when it started. And it really started with a question of what would it feel like if rural Colorado had its own startup week? And you'll hear a lot of business support people say that founders should always be at the lead of everything. And this is a perfect example of that. So we didn't try to replicate or live up to Boulder Startup Week or Denver Startup Week. We really just asked ourselves, what would the rural Colorado version look like? And we put founders in charge of the program. Each of them has their own track. So like the people track, tech track, money track, toolbox track. Yeah, there's a fun track and a makers track. We now have a climate track because that's so important. And they're the ones out there promoting the event and telling the people that they think should be leading sessions to apply to speak. And they're looking at all of those applications for speakers and really thinking about, is this something that I would want to attend? And so that just builds in the quality of the program. From the very beginning of the event, it was important that it's free to attend because rural entrepreneurs do not have a huge budget to attend conferences. We didn't want to take their time is the most valuable contribution that they give. They're taking time from their business to be there. So we wanted to really make it accessible. And like all rural entrepreneurship support events, it has to start small. And so the first few startup weeks were not as big as they are now. And they had probably like 30 sessions at most during the week. After year 4, and we did have a tough time during the pandemic. It was fully virtual for 1 year, and then it was hybrid for the next couple of years. And then that's when Startup Colorado fully took over the event. So we took it over, and in a previous life, I did a lot of event management at different film and music festivals. And I kind of brought that into the Startup Week design and said, we can be doing 3 sessions against each other. Like we can pack this week with sessions because it's a similar level of difficulty to plan a few events for 1 week as it is many events instead of trying to like spread them out over time. And there's 2 benefits of that. One is that we end up with a lot of speakers. And so we usually have about 100 speakers that week. And our speakers are a key part of our audience. If they're there to speak, they're also there to attend. So that's like a fifth of our audience is in the program. And then the other huge benefit is that, trying to build a support event that is helpful for any entrepreneur at any business stage in any industry means that your audience is at totally different levels and they need very different things. Any given founder can look at that program and see like, well, most of the stuff doesn't interest me at the place I'm in, but these few things do. That feels like it applies directly to me. So the diversity of the program is really helpful to draw in the biggest audience we can because there's something in there for everyone. And it's not the kind of conference where we expect everyone to be there 100% of the time because we all have jobs, we all have stuff going on. So we say it's choose your own adventure. Look at the week and prioritize which sessions are the most important for you and just attend those.
Yeah, giving someone your time if you're a small business owner is kinda everything.
When local organizers are co-designing sessions and sponsors are local businesses and the attendees become next year's speakers. That growth really came from trust. And when people drove 4 hours and found it worth it, they told someone. So like in all rural communities, word of mouth is not just a strategy, it's proof that it's working.
So, how does storytelling factor into building culture? How do you focus on storytelling to drive what you do?
Yeah. People don't often see themselves as entrepreneurs until they see someone who looks like them called one. So, storytelling is cultural permission. When a local rancher turned robotics engineer gets profiled, it tells the next person that path is real and it's possible here. I think often rural founders underestimate their own stories because they're comparing themselves to Silicon Valley or the nearest urban hub, which in Colorado we call the Front Range, which is the Fort Collins, Boulder, Denver, Colorado Springs. Just that's where the bulk of our population is. It's city after city. So we help them see that building in a small town is a competitive advantage and not a handicap. So the Rural Startup Colorado newsletter, the Rural Startup, does this. It's not just news, it's a mirror. It says, here's what entrepreneurship looks like in your region. So when communities start reflecting their founders' stories back at them, the founders stick around. Story is a part of retention.
I appreciate you explaining that. Storytelling is just something that it's very near and dear to my heart, especially with business owners. If somebody is listening to this, they're in a rural town in Colorado, Oregon, anywhere in the US, and they want to start building this kind of culture. They want to start thinking about how to implement a give first culture. Maybe there's someone with connections in their community, or they're just someone who wants to start a small business who thinks if I could start that kind of culture, it would be easier for me to get the ball rolling. What should they do and what should they avoid?
Have coffee with 5 people who are already doing something. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to not start immediately with an event, like starting with conversation and seeing who's already trying to build something and what do they need the most. I also recommend like find your one co-conspirator, like one other person who cares and will show up with you to organize an event. Like you can't sustain it alone. If you're trying to do that, my heart goes out to you. But you also don't need a committee either. Sometimes a committee can slow things down. And so I just recommend having that one co conspirator and, resist the urge to import a model wholesale. Like your town isn't going to be Boulder, isn't Portland. You need to build something that fits and don't have a lot of high expectations on the first event. Celebrate early and often, as we've been talking about, like every first pitch, every new business, every local feature, market, and call attention to it. Sometimes I hit email fatigue where I'm like, oh, people must be tired of hearing from me by now. But then I talk to people I've been emailing and they're like, oh, I love hearing about everything you guys are doing. And it's so nice to know that things are happening, which is hard to remember sometimes. I'm like, well, I have no idea how this email is going to sound or if they're tired of hearing from me. I think the answer is usually to over communicate, to celebrate everything, and to remind people that this is something that is built, one email at a time. It takes a lot of consistency. And so once you start something, keep it going and try to start it in a way that is sustainable. A weekly event is really hard to keep up with. A monthly event can be hard to start with. Try something once a year and then once a quarter. And as people begin to get used to it and they really like it, see if they want it to be more often. And spoiler, sometimes people say that they want more and then they're not going to show up. So you
Yeah.
really have to pay attention to what your community is ready for.
Yeah, that's fantastic advice. Yeah, don't go into it with high expectations that are unrealistic for you because maybe sustainable to you is one phone call every other week with your co-conspirator for now.
What can take only like 2 or 3 years to build in an urban environment often takes 5 or 10 years to build in a rural community. And so just not expecting results as quickly, but continuing to grind on it is so important. And it's also honestly more impactful in rural communities. So even though it takes longer, the impact is clearer and your community will celebrate you for it in a way that an urban environment might not even recognize.
Where can we learn about what you do?
So startupcolorado.org is where you can find everything. It'll connect you with West Slope Startup Week as well as the rural startup newsletter that we've been talking about. It's also where you can find all of our articles, even more than what's in that rural startup substack. Yeah, it's the hub of everything we do. So startupcolorado.org is where you should go to start. And that can take you to the westlopestartupweek.com website, which is everything about that event. And please come join us in Durango this October. We're going to have a great time. It's totally free and high quality programming. We do everything we can to make it easier to stay and get to Durango. So we have ride shares that we help set up. If you want to carpool with someone, we have a free camping situation. We give discounts for local hotels. And we have often had groups of founders like go in on an Airbnb together, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, we just hope that we can keep pulling in more and more folks. So I've had people tell me that they had an idea and they finally, got the boost that they needed during West Slopes Week to pull the trigger and get started. I've had people tell me they got their first investor at West Slope Startup Week. I've seen companies start a collaboration after meeting at West Slope Startup Week. And that is the most rewarding thing about what we do.
Thanks for listening to the Rural Blueprint. If this conversation was useful, share it with someone who needs it. You can find resources for rural entrepreneurs and their communities, including funding opportunities and business development programs, and more at reinventingrural.com. We'll see you next time.